Hey there, I'm Sharon Welch, and welcome to A Brave Journey, the podcast to help you throw out those legacy belief and identity stories that you've been lugging around on autopilot for decades, so you can jump back in the driver's seat of your aliveness again. When you change your mind, you change your life. Are you ready? Let's get into it. It'll be fun. At this point, if you are a few episodes into this podcast, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, so I have a belief system that I wasn't aware was operating in the background. I have all of these systems that I have somehow unconsciously bought into that are keeping me where I am. I need to put myself into places where I can make the uncomfortable comfortable and the unfamiliar familiar. Great. And yet, we still keep going back sometimes to these old habits that just vex us. We know we want to change them, but it's just so easy to go back. And so then you have to wonder, why is it that some of our old patterns and habits are so seductive? What is the deal with that? This has been on my mind this week because it's something that I've actually struggled with. And I've had to pause at one point and just take a breath and ask myself, what on earth am I doing? I've done all this work to make a huge transformation in my life, to wake up, get out of autopilot, really be purposeful about how I'm choosing to spend the time left I have in my life, hopefully for a long time. And I've been doing that for a number of years now. And all of a sudden, every once in a while, I find myself going back to these patterns, and it's crazy making. And so when I thought about it, I had to remind myself that these things do happen. And typically there are a couple different ways that it might show up, or a couple reasons why you may go back to these patterns that are frustrating, that you can't quite eradicate. The first one that comes to mind for me, I think about those of us who are all just so very busy. We're juggling multiple things simultaneously with what appears to be grace and ease, but sometimes it's actually quite overwhelming. And so our mind, our brains create shortcuts wherever it can to help manage how many things we have to juggle at one time. So if you've ever done any training in things like micro iniquities or, things like that, one of the things that you have learned is that as human beings, we like to put things in boxes. We like to make assumptions about things as a general rule, I'm using air quotes, because it's an easy button. So our brain has less to do processing to get from point A to point B on a particular topic about people, about events, about things that happen in the world. And those little shortcuts allow us to just manage all of the things that we're bombarded with every day. So it's not right or wrong. It's just something that our brain does. So if you think about that concept and you apply it here where we're all so busy, we need to find every shortcut that we can, because it's truly a coping mechanism. And so if we have a way that we're used to dealing with something, when we get overwhelmed, we'll go back to the way we know because we can be more automatic about it. We can expend less energy trying to get to the other side. We can be more on autopilot. So when I think about that particular way that we get sucked back into those kind of patterns, it reminds me that that's what happens when we forget to be present, when we do get caught up in our to-do list, when we do get caught up in the list of demands that are constantly bombarding us, when we do fall off the wagon for our morning routine that allows us to do the meditation or the journaling or go to the gym or just take a few breaths to just get in our own bodies and be ready for the day. So that was the first thing. That one of the ways you may notice that you end up back in some of these old patterns that you're wanting to change is you're just frankly overwhelmed. The second one is, if you think about how it is whenever you create a new habit, it always feels uncomfortable at first, right? When you learn to play the piano or wanted to take up yoga or journaling, or you wanted to be really great about flossing your teeth, whatever it is, it can be uncomfortable. And so we have these critter brains in the back of our heads that constantly just want us to be safe. We're hardwired from prehistoric times to protect ourselves from crazy hungry lions or falling boulders or some other calamity. And so in that way, at a core level, when things are unfamiliar or uncomfortable, our critter brain, frankly, really our ego, reads that as you are unsafe and you might die. We must go back to doing things the way that we were doing it before because that's the way you stay alive. Now, obviously today in the modern world, we're not running away from hungry lions. We're not living in caves. Hopefully we're not about to get squished by a large boulder. So when those voices come up, we have to recognize them for what they are. If you think about your ego, or you think about your critter brain as this, little pet animal that lives in this safe, warm, cozy cave inside your head, and every time that you want to do something new, it's like you got to pull that little creature out of the cave on a leash. They don't want to go. They're squinting in the bright light. They feel unsafe outside of the cozy walls of that cave. And it's uncomfortable and it's unfamiliar and you might die, right? So sometimes when we go back to our old patterns, it's because we want to feel safe. As humans, we need to feel safe. But when we're not present, we go ahead and go back to these patterns that, while they feel safe, are not the direction we actually want to be going. So in that way, that's another reason why we might kind of head back into those types of patterns. So I was thinking about this. I was walking down along the beach the other day, and I was frustrated with the fact that, look, I have a lot going on in my business. I have a lot going on personally. And I noticed that I was falling back on some of those patterns. Some of them were actual physical patterns. Some of them were mental or emotional patterns. And for me, it just took taking a minute to pause and say to myself, okay, I'm not going to beat myself up about it, but I am going to ask myself why. I'm going to ask myself and get curious. That's interesting. I want to know why I fell back into that pattern. And when I looked at it for me, I did have a lot going on. I was juggling a lot. And so it was sort of nice to just put some things back on autopilot. It was sort of like slipping into your comfy pajamas, right? Or getting a pint of your favorite ice cream and watching a rom-com. Those sort of comfort things that we do when we do feel overwhelmed and we go back into bad habits, or, not even bad habits necessarily, but old habits and old patterns that we really do consciously want to change for one reason or another. It feels like that. And so I knew at that time that I was overwhelmed and I was trying to do too many things at once. If you've ever been in the corporate world and done lean training from Japan, you learn that multitasking is actually not efficient at all. And yet we all do it. And sometimes it's out of survival, right? We're hit by so many things. We feel like we have to do everything at the same time. And certainly the super women among us, we're used to overachieving because it's how we try to level the playing field to a certain extent. So for me, it was really just noticing when I was getting into that pattern and then pausing, taking a couple of breaths. And rather than feeling disappointed in myself that I had slid backwards a little bit, I just got curious and tried to dig at the why. And what I realized was that it was because I was overwhelmed and I wasn't being present, and I had faltered over a couple days because I was overwhelmed to do those morning rituals for me that set my mindset for the day. I abandoned all of those things that I hadn't turned into the familiar and the comfortable because I just couldn't deal. Do you feel me? So those patterns that we get into feel comfortable. They feel familiar. And it's very interesting how our brain will go back to them when we kind of lose the beat on that presence part. Our critter brain, our ego, all the parts of the brain that talk to us nonstop throughout the day, just the running, nattering commentary. Those parts of our brain are actually pretty dumb. We'll dive into this more in another episode, but your ego, your critter brain, that nattering voice is actually really easy to trick. It has no concept of what is true and what is made up. It has no concept of what is now, what is the past, what is the future. This is why, as an aside, some of the work that you can do about acting as if, role playing, writing down and feeling your perfect day, These things work because our brains are actually pretty dumb. We'll dive into that another time. But the key there is really that this idea around mindset, where when you feel those things start to come up, or you notice that you've gone back on autopilot, just pause, tell yourself something different, and then move forward again. That's really all it takes. There is no more complication than that. So for me, that's really what I found helps me stay out of those patterns. But like everyone, I do get into them. And no matter how much work I've done, no matter how much work you've done, we always will, on some level, have those little half steps backwards. We just have to embrace that and build tools around how to get past it. So I think the best thing that you can do, and I know that I've certainly talked about this, and I think we've talked about this in here too, is you need to be kind to yourself. Let's not add this to the list of mean or criticizing or demoralizing things that we say to ourselves. Frankly, by continually going back to the known or sure thing, we are actually making it impossible for ourselves to grow and move forward. So I was watching that Sex and the City follow-on series called And Just Like That, which is a series where all the characters are now in their 50s, navigating all of that change and questioning and reinventing themselves, like totally my life right now. And there was this line in one of the episodes that was, it's better to be confused than to be sure, because when you are sure, then nothing can change. How often do we feel scared or even shameful when we aren't sure about something? And how often do we try to hide the fact that we're confused and maybe even a bit fearful? The truth is, it's actually the confusion and instability and discomfort that allows us to grow and change. I talk about discomfort where the first 3 letters actually mean do it still. It's why I'm curious about new things and different ways of doing things. It's why I love traveling to unfamiliar places. It puts me in that place of discomfort, and I do feel fear, but I do it still. It's why I get an itch and an anxiousness to shake up my life when I'm feeling too comfortable. It's just how I'm wired. And after decades of trying to squash that down because it's not, quote, responsible or a pathway to success, I am now in a recovery of sorts to unlearn that and embrace my hunger for the adventure of change and adapting. And yet we all still do it. We all still seek that comfort, and we do feel that fear. So of course, it's easier said than done, right? We all have the critter brains. We all have the egos that at the end of the day want to keep us safe. And so if you can hear those voices and, just think of them as little nagging children. At the end of the day, they just want to be recognized. So go ahead, look them in the eye, recognize them, say thank you. You've always kept me safe before, but I don't need that kind of support right now. I've got this. If you can do that, you're going to find less and less that you go back to those old patterns, because what you also know is that the only way to make something familiar and comfortable when it's not is to keep doing it. So even if you step back a half a step and then go forward again, you're still doing it. And at some point as you do that, what you end up with is a whole new set of patterns and beliefs that do feel comfortable, that do feel familiar, because those are the ones that you kept doing. And then those old ones really do fall away. But boy, that's seduction when we get going Mach 6. That's seduction when we get into autopilot and just let our brains create those shortcuts. It's hard. So be kind to yourself. It happens to all of us. And just get curious. Just get really curious about why it is. What is the core of why you took that step back? You fall back on it, not what you did, not what you think you failed at. You just want to look at the why. And I think when you can get curious about those kind of things, that's when you see the real breakthroughs. And now knowing all this, having said all this, and this is where things remain, tangled up and maybe a little messy. So we can know all of this to be true and still find it challenging to work through it. And most of the time, that comes right back full circle to beliefs that we haven't yet recognized or addressed as no longer working for us. So we get held back from achieving these goals or changing these patterns, or get held back from even trying to be present for just a minute to see if the root cause of us, falling back on old patterns is because we're overwhelmed, right? So we have these goals, these ultimatums we put on ourselves. So all that ends up happening, if we haven't rooted out at least a few of what I'll call the limiting beliefs that we have, we get tense and we feel pressured. And at the same time, there's maybe some sort of dissonance around or conflict with our built-in ideas of what's right. So, for example, when we see a messy house, we may believe we need to clean it. We may have a strong desire to pursue a particular career, but then we turn around and tell ourselves, oh, but I couldn't possibly do that. So as people with unexamined beliefs who keep on autopilot doing what is, quote, right, but sacrifices their desires and passions, has limiting beliefs holding them back. That is the root cause in every single case. So most of us would rather give up on our dreams because we have different expectations of ourselves. So these are internal guidelines and beliefs that are leading us in how we spend our money, how we view our relationships and our career choices, how we spend our free time. Our beliefs are at the core. They're important to everything. So let's name and claim the ones that are holding us back. What are the top 4 limiting beliefs that are stopping us from all of this? Now, a couple episodes ago, you may have downloaded, I mentioned that I had a sort of journaling exercise around figuring out a few of the limiting beliefs that you have as a way to begin to think about how you might want to edit them or recurate them. So this is sort of a follow-on to that. And I do have another little guide that really is the printed, memorialized version of this part of our conversation that I would love for you to also download for free if you'd like to remind you of these things as you go through this process of recurating your own beliefs. So there's 4 of them that really I'll focus on. One is the belief that I am not good enough. Many people give up before they reach the top simply because they're not convinced that they have what it takes. Some of us settle for less, thinking that the rewards would not make them happy. So believing that you're not good enough is the most challenging and damaging belief to overcome. It's important to know yourself and accept who you are. So consider that you have the same circumstances as the others before you who achieved incredible things. Combat that desire to compare yourself with others because it only will cause you more stress and hinder your progress. The I am not good enough is, in my mind, the most pervasive limiting belief right now, largely because we are exposed to so many other curated versions of people's lives that we constantly measure and compare ourselves against what are frankly false, shiny narratives. Let it go. The next one is that idea of, well, it's possible for, quote, them, but not me. So many people develop a pessimistic attitude like this. There's a belief that others have everything going for them, or they got the right opportunities, or they had the right amount of money, or they have the right support system. But I don't have the energy or the right circumstances to make those things happen. So look, everyone has challenges. Everyone struggles. Everyone faces obstacles. But instead of looking at those as unfavorable, think of them as an opportunity to learn and grow. And recognize and accept that the only thing holding you back is your belief that things won't work out well for you. You're shooting yourself in the foot. Ask yourself, if they can, what's holding me back from accomplishing the same feats of amazingness? Questions like these shift your focus from what you don't have and what others have to what you do have and what you can do to change those realities. You take it in. And when you redirect that focus from a lack of abundance, you open yourself up to a whole new set of possibilities, including the belief and confidence needed to live the life that you want. The third one, here's one. I bet you've said this to yourself before. I just need to fix this one more thing before I finally feel ready. That's a nice avoidance tactic, isn't it? I think we've all done that at one point or another. And when you feel stuck or like you can't move any farther, that's a cue that something needs to change. And so we do tend to think that we're the only thing that needs changing. But the truth is that things work the way that they work. The beauty of this is that it allows you to change what isn't working. And instead of feeling like you need to fix one more thing or force yourself to be more patient, just try shifting your focus to what you can do, to the changes you can make. Your inner dialogue will start to change from one of lack to one of abundance. So that one was really twofold, right? There's the, I need to fix one more thing before I finally feel ready. That's you with your checklist of someone else's expectations of what you have to have in place to deserve to change and deserve to grow and deserve abundance. And then the other part of it is, it might also allow you to focus on things that are not yours to change, which creates an artificial hard stop for you because you're focused on someone else's job and not your own job and the things that you can change. And then there's the, I have no time. We were just talking about how we're all busy. So no matter how busy you are, no matter how tired you may seem, there's a straightforward thing that you can do right now to get unstuck. Stop telling yourself that there's not enough time. Stop telling yourself that you're too busy or that there's no way to get past what's stopping you. Because the thing is, we are wired to win. And if that game that you're playing is that you don't have enough time, you don't have enough resources, you're not good enough, that's the game you're playing, you're going to win it. When you realize that nothing is standing in the way of your progress, you can start creating a space in your life for those positive changes. If you change the game to, I always have the time and resources I need to do the things that are most important to me, think about that. If you flip that script and go ahead and try winning at that game, what a difference it'll make. The truth is, there are people with busier schedules living the life that you're dreaming of. They could have decided that there wasn't enough time in the day to accomplish what they have now, but they didn't. So to combat that idea that there's no time, just set your priorities. Eliminate distractions. Focus on what matters. So as a reminder, there's sort of this step-by-step process you can go through if these are the kind of beliefs that are coming up that are getting in your way of making progress on these things we're talking about, recurating your belief system, not falling back into old patterns, not conforming for comfort, really finding that authentic life that you want to live. The first one is you have to ask yourself if the belief is even true. Do you really know that it's true? Answering no to yourself might seem silly, but simply stating that the belief might not be true gives you permission subconsciously to continue to examine the belief more objectively. The next thing is determine the source of the belief. How did you get the belief? Where did it come from? This should all start to sound really familiar with the journaling exercise that we talked about a few episodes ago. Sometimes we believe things with a lot of certainty, but when we really think about it, we're not sure why we believe it. If you're going to base your decisions around a belief, that belief should have either come from an expert or a lot of personal experience. If you don't know why you believe it, you might want to be concerned about why you are hanging the balance of your life on it. An expert should be someone that started where you are and then achieved what you want to achieve, if you're going to use supposedly experts. And once you've done that, the third thing is make your declaration. Declare to yourself, I don't believe this anymore. It's not true. And now look for the proof to show yourself that it's not true or that something else is true. If you remember, we talked a few episodes ago about how this is exactly what our ego wants to do. It wants to prove us right. So if you have decided that something is not true and you've declared that to yourself, your ego now wants to work in your favor and prove that it's not true just as much as when you were on autopilot, it wanted to prove that it was. And then imagine being free from that belief. what would your life be like? What would your life feel like without that belief? How would you change? How would your life change? You really need to feel that. You really need to imagine that. And then you don't want to leave a void. So you're going to replace the belief. You're going to find another belief as the antidote to the old belief. Getting rid of the limiting belief is good, but by eliminating it and replacing it with something positive is like turning it to 11. It's great. And then, just like you did by deciding to find proof that the old belief is not true, you need to find evidence for the new belief. You need to find that evidence that the new belief is valid. And keep adding evidence until you feel comfortable with the new belief. And then finally, you need to test yourself. Observe your feelings, your behaviors, and your results after you replace that belief. Once you've eliminated that old belief, replaced it with something you like better, you will absolutely feel and behave differently. And you're going to get the results that you're looking for. So you're starting to see how this is really all tied together. Your belief system, the structures that we subscribe to and agree to live by, the battle constantly with our ego and critter brain that wants to keep us comfortable and safe and familiar. These are all things that you're having to juggle in some semblance of grace and effectiveness to try to continue to grow. And it only becomes more complicated the older you get. We have more input, we have more responsibilities, we've got more connections and tentacles to the world. Life isn't as simple as when we were 5 years old on the playground. So the thing is, you just have to start somewhere. You just have to take that next step. And the good news is we are wired to win. So whatever you've set your mind to, you're definitely winning at it. Right? And so like I said, just be careful which game you're choosing to play. Depending on what your goals are you playing the game of I don't deserve to eat that, or I never have enough time or enough money, or I always choose the wrong friends? Or are you playing the game of I always have the time I need for what's important, or my body craves what it needs at all times and that's what I give it, or I deserve love and respect? Think of all those games that you're playing in your life right now. All of the tournaments that you have entered. Are they the ones you really want to be winning at? Are those the trophies that you want? If they are, you go. But if the games you are actually winning at are holding you back and keeping you small, it might be time to up your game. So let me hear from you. How are you upping your game? What are those things that were holding you back? What are those areas of comfort that you keep falling back to? And how are you finding a way to stop yourself in your tracks and get curious about it? I want to hear it. Hey, thanks for listening to A Brave Journey. I'm so happy we're here. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and leave a review, and share this with a friend who could benefit too. See you next time.